You ask all my teammates, one thing about Michael Jordan was he never asked me to do something that he didn't do. When people see this, they're going to say, well, he wasn't really a nice guy. He may have been a tyrant. Oh, well, that's you, because you never won anything. I wanted to win, but I wanted them to win and be a part of that as well. Like, I don't have to do this. I'm only doing it because it is who I am. That's how I played the game. That was my mentality. If you don't want to play that way, don't play that way.
Michael Jordan did not arrive in the NBA as reckless. That matters because the popular myth suggests an inevitability to Jordan. That Jordan's dominance was always volcanic, chaotic, untamable. But the reality is much more precise. Jordan arrived as a player whose instincts had been rewarded at every level, not indulged, not unchecked, but rewarded. At North Carolina, Dean Smith didn't suppress Jordan's aggressiveness. He channeled it. The system did not ask Jordan to disappear. It asked him to act within defined moments. Jordan learned early that patience was something you endured until it was time to strike. And when that moment came, he was expected to end it. By the time Jordan entered the NBA, he did not see immediacy as selfishness. He saw it as responsibility. If you were the best option, hesitation was abdication. Dominance was not ego, it was duty. This is the first misunderstanding that shadows his early career. When Jordan exploded statistically as a rookie, the league responded not with skepticism, but with awe. The Bulls were terrible. Jordan was electric. The equation was simple. Without him, they were nothing. With him, they were watchable. That dynamic hardened quickly. As Sports Illustrated framed it later, the Bulls were built to play alongside Jordan, not with him, at least the early versions. And that distinction matters. The roster did not dilute his instincts, it validated them. Each possession that broke down reaffirmed the same solution. Clear out, give it to Michael, let force resolve ambiguity. I was watching some tape on this and watched Dave Corzine, who's one of these old school players, great player at DePaul, had a nice jump shot for a big guy back in the day, but the way that he moved is incongruous with Michael Jordan or with what we expect from the NBA now. He was slow-footed, almost immobile, not a lot of athleticism, just doesn't fit on the same court as Michael Jordan. By 1988, Jordan was not just the league's most dominant scorer, he was gravitational center, MVP, defensive player of the year, scoring champion, the most complete individual season modern basketball had seen. If instincts were evidence-based, Jordan had every reason to trust this completely. He's Jokic before Jokic, filling up every statistical category. And then Detroit arrived. Is this where the Spurs are with the Thunder? Are they going to be the Detroit Pistons to the Thunder? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe Wemby is the one who will be ascendant, and the Thunder will prove to be the spoilers for the Spurs. It'll be interesting. The Pistons, though, in a similar way to the Spurs, at least at this moment, did not see Jordan as a problem to be stopped. They saw him as a system to be decoded. And this is where historical framing collapses into moral language. Dirty play, brutality, villainy. Sports Illustrated records suggest something more calculated in this, though. Detroit's physicality was not random violence or in absentia brutality. It was diagnostic pressure. They wanted to know when Jordan went. They wanted to know how Chicago responded under duress. They wanted to know whether variation existed. And what they learned was that it didn't. Each time Detroit forced chaos, a bump on the drive, a hard contest, a delayed whistle, Chicago defaulted to the same response. Jordan attacked. The defense collapsed. The floor shrank. The reads simplified. There's a great book about this era called The Jordan Rules. But the Jordan Rules were not about preventing points. Jordan still scored. They were about shaping possessions and turning Chicago's most powerful instinct into a tell. This is why the Pistons were never impressed by Jordan's stat lines. They understood something crucial. The Bulls' offense under pressure became smaller, not larger. Fewer options, fewer decisions, fewer actors. In reports at the time, they put it like this: Chicago cracked under the pressure while Detroit turned pain into pleasure. That line has been read as a character judgment. In context, it reads more like a systems diagnosis. Detroit didn't create a coding error. They broke Chicago's range of responses. By the 1990 conference finals, the Bulls had improved everywhere that did not matter. More wins, better spacing, smarter secondary players. But when the Pistons applied the same pressure, Chicago arrived at the same destination: Jordan attacking alone, carrying not just the offense, but the emotional burden of resolution. This is where the Pippen migraine, which happens in Game 7, becomes a symbol rather than an anecdote. His Game 7 collapse is often framed as fragility, but the deeper issue was exposed. When Jordan attacked and the defense collapsed, Pippen was required to react instantly to occupy space already compressed by Jordan's gravity. That demand amplified the pressure rather than distributing it. Jordan's dominance did not empower his teammates under siege. It accelerated their decision-making in an already hostile environment. Detroit understood this better than Chicago understood itself. By 1990, the Pistons were no longer beating the Bulls with mystery. They were beating them with familiarity. Each year, Chicago got closer. Each year, Detroit waited longer. And each year, when the moment arrived, Chicago reverted. This is the critical distinction that later mythology erases. Jordan was not failing, his instincts were. And instincts, once rewarded long enough, do not surrender easily. Anyone heard of Russell Westbrook? I think he still plays the same way, but he's been rewarded for it for so long. He's going to the Hall of Fame for it. So that's what makes Jordan the GOAT as well, is his ability to adapt in these different situations with different players and to recognize his own limitations or the limitations of those around him and to adapt to them. The Bulls' internal conversation after 1990 was not about effort. They shifted it to the ceiling. The organization understood something Jordan did not want to hear. His way of dominating had reached its limit against the best prepared opponents. The realization did not produce trust. It produced tension. I think that's an important thought. So many times in contemporary accounts frame this as Jordan learning to trust his teammates, but I disagree with that. Jordan certainly did not believe the answer lay in changing his approach. From his perspective, he had done everything required. He scored, he defended, he endured contact that no other player could absorb. If anything, the solution seemed obvious. Everyone else needed to rise to his level. That belief wasn't arrogance, it was consistency on his side. It was the logical conclusion of a career that was built on personal responsibility. But Detroit had proven something devastating. Chicago's problem was not that Jordan did too much, it was that he did the same thing every time. This is where Phil Jackson enters the story, not as guru, but as broker and interpreter. Jackson didn't arrive with a message about trust or sharing. He arrived with a recognition that Jordan's nervous system, his timing, his response patterns, his internal clock had to be disrupted. But that comes later. At this point in the story, all that exists is resistance. Jordan had not yet been convinced. The Bulls had not yet been transformed. Detroit had not yet been surpassed. What existed was a collision between the most refined instinct in basketball history and the first defense disciplined enough to turn that instinct against itself. And that collision was not resolved through belief. It was resolved through delay. The triangle as delay technology. Phil Jackson did not walk into the Bulls locker room with answers. He walked in with a diagnosis. By the fall of 1990, the organization understood something had to change, but it did not agree on where the change should be applied. Management saw roster imbalances. Coaches saw schematic stagnation. Michael Jordan saw unfinished business. None of these perspectives were wrong, but none of them were sufficient. Jackson's insight was narrower and more dangerous. The Bulls did not need to become tougher. They did not need to want it more. They did not need to believe. They needed to interrupt themselves. That's a difficult thing to say to the most dominant player in the world. Jackson was not naive about Jordan's personality. He knew Jordan's competitiveness bordered on compulsion. He knew sarcasm was a defense mechanism. He knew Jordan measured respect through confrontation rather than affirmation. Most importantly, he knew Jordan experienced hesitation as a threat. This is why Jackson did not frame the triangle offense as a philosophy. He framed it as necessity. The triangle's not sold to Jordan as a way to make teammates better. It was sold as a way to make Detroit irrelevant. That distinction mattered. Jackson understood Jordan's psychology well enough to know that altruism would never motivate him, but control would. Still, Jordan resisted. Publicly, the resistance was flippant. That triangle stuff, ballroom dancing, sarcasm that framed the offense as ornamental rather than functional. Privately, the resistance was deeper. The triangle demanded that Jordan wait, not just occasionally, but structurally. It inserted pauses into possessions where Jordan's advantage had always been speed and certainty. This was not about shots. Jordan was still free to score. It was about when he was allowed to decide. Tex Winter's offense was designed around continuity, spacing, and read and react principles that unfolded over time. The ball moved not to reward unselfishness, but to force the defense to declare itself. Every pass delayed resolution. Every cut introduced ambiguity. The offense did not eliminate Jordan's dominance, it postponed it. For Jordan, postponement felt like abdication. This is the central psychological conflict of the Bulls' transformation, and it's rarely described accurately. Jordan did not fear losing authority, he feared losing his timing. His entire competitive identity was built around acting before others could react. The triangle asked him to act after the defense committed. The inversion was profound. In December 1990, Jackson acknowledged the discomfort openly. He admitted that the offense limited Jordan, and he said so plainly, almost giving Jordan a pass, allowing him to recognize that he was, again, in control. He was allowing this to happen. Jackson said Michael doesn't need the offense. It limits him. No doubt about it. That's not criticism. Again, that's validation. Jackson was conceding Jordan's point while refusing to change course. The concession mattered. It reframed the triangle not as improvement, but as a trade-off. Jordan understood trade-offs. He did not accept sermons. What Jackson never said publicly, but clearly understood, was that Jordan's instincts had become too efficient. They resolved possessions too quickly. They denied teammates the opportunity to shape outcomes. Under playoff pressure, that efficiency compressed the floor rather than expanding it. The triangle existed to slow Jordan down just enough for everyone else to become consequential, to make them matter. That's not trust, as it's been framed in the past. It's forced relevance. The early months with the triangle were uneven. The Bulls won because they were too talented not to, but the offense looked awkward. Players hesitated. Some didn't understand their reads at all. Jordan oscillated between compliance and rebellion. He would dominate for stretches, then pull back sharply as if to test the limits of the leash. This oscillation was not indecision, it was experimentation. Jordan was learning about the boundaries of the system, probing where his authority still existed and where it had been intentionally removed. He wasn't surrendering control, and he would never do that, but he was mapping it out. This mapping process was mirrored elsewhere in the organization. Jerry Krause's personnel philosophy hardened during this period. He didn't seek players who would challenge Jordan's status. He sought players who would survive in proximity to it. Shooters who could remain patient, big men who did not demand touches, defenders who could absorb punishment without retaliation. Krause himself acknowledged he could not bring in young guards to learn under Michael. Jordan would destroy them in practice, not metaphorically, psychologically. The environment required players who could function without validation. It wasn't a warm environment, it was discipline. The triangle, the roster, and the coaching staff formed a single containment system. Tex Winter provided the structure. John Bach built the defense. Jackson managed the emotional temperature. Together, they created a space where Jordan's instincts were not erased, but delayed until optimal. This delay was the hardest in moments of crisis. Late-game situations revealed the true nature of the transformation. Jordan still wanted the ball. He still believed resolution was his responsibility. But the difference was that now he had to read first. This is where Jackson's psychological intervention mattered most. He didn't call plays. He asked questions. Who's open? What do you see? They weren't rhetorical. They forced Jordan to process information before acting. That processing cost time. Time felt dangerous. But over the course of the season, something subtle changed. Jordan's irritation diminished, not because he believed in the system, but because he began to recognize its utility. The triangle did not reduce his dominance, it protected it from exhaustion. Detroit could no longer wait him out. The offense no longer announced its intentions. The Bulls did not speed up under pressure, they slowed down. This was the moment Detroit lost its leverage. When the Bulls finally confronted the Pistons in the 1991 conference finals, the games did not feel heroic, they felt methodical. Chicago absorbed contact without accelerating. They passed through the pressure instead of reacting to it. The Pistons' familiar provocations produced unfamiliar responses. Jordan still attacked, but later, after the defense shifted, after options revealed themselves. The Pistons, accustomed to reading Jordan's timing, suddenly found themselves guessing. The mythology here often rushes ahead to celebration, but inside the Bulls, the transformation did not feel triumphant, it felt tense. The suppression of instinct required constant vigilance. One lapse could collapse the structure. One emotional surge could revert the team to old patterns. Jackson understood the fragility. He didn't frame the breakthrough as destiny. He framed it as discipline, and discipline is exhausting. This is why the first championship did not resolve Jordan's internal conflict. It just postponed it. Jordan had learned his delay instincts, but he had not extinguished them. He had governed them temporarily in service of a specific objective. What happened after the first title, how authority reasserted itself, how hierarchy hardened, how patience became optional again, well, that's a different story. But none of it's intelligible without understanding this phase, because 1991 was not about trust, it was about timing. Jordan did not become suddenly generous and love his teammates. He became strategic. He didn't relinquish control. He refined when it should be exercised. And that redefinition required psychological strength against his habits, pushback against his reflexes, and change of his internal clock that had governed his greatness since he burst onto the scene. That's the cost of ascension. Youth, deferred authority, and the Thunder's unfinished question. The danger of youth is not inexperience, it's ambiguity. Youth allows a team to exist without hierarchy hardening into identity. Roles are provisional. Authority is fluid. Decision-making feels shared, not because it has been consciously distributed, but because no one has yet accumulated enough leverage to seize it. This is where the Oklahoma City Thunder live. The Thunder's cohesion is real. Their ball movement is not performative. Their spacing is not forced. Patience at this stage feels organic. But it is important to understand why this patience feels easy at this point. No one has been asked to surrender anything yet. Shai doesn't dominate possessions the way Jordan once did, not because he lacks instinct, but because his efficiency allows restraint to feel natural. His game is economical. His movement is measured. He rarely needs to impose himself early because advantages present themselves later. This matters. Restraint for them almost feels virtuous. I don't know how many times I've heard this year about him not even having to play in the fourth quarter. It feels developmental and it aligns with their growth. It feels collaborative, and the outcomes so far have mostly been positive. But restraint changes meaning over time. The Thunder's identity has been forged in a shared ascent. Everyone has improved together. Everyone has learned together. No one is yet to confront the moment when personal ceilings collide with collective structure. But that moment is unavoidable. Chicago reached it in 1990 because Jordan had already reached the apex of individual dominance. Oklahoma City has not arrived there yet. Shai's still ascending. Jalen Williams is still expanding. Holmgren is still discovering what his physicality will eventually demand of him. And the roster is still forming into its future. I understand that the comparisons to the 91 Bulls should be handled carefully. The Thunder are not late-stage Chicago. They're pre-conflict Chicago. That's why the Spurs interaction is so interesting. Losing 3 straight games to this team sets up a potential stage. It puts that in their mind. I mean, it can be easy to forget now because of their dominant start to this regular season that they went to 2 Game 7s last year and certainly did not feel like an inevitable championship. But because of their youth and the roster continuity, they almost feel inevitable this year. But their egalitarianism is not ideological. It's based on circumstance. Their unselfishness has yet to be tested. It's unthreatened at this point. Their discipline has not yet weighed against instinct that insists on expression. It's not a criticism on them. It's a condition of where they're at. Mark Daignault's coaching philosophy understands this implicitly. The 0.5 rule, it's not about speed. It's about preempting hesitation before instinct can hijack a possession. Catch, decide, move. The system does not ask players to be selfless. It asks them to be decisive. Decisiveness at this stage feels freeing, but systems built to prevent domination will eventually be tested by players who grow powerful enough to challenge them. That's the future tension Oklahoma City has yet to encounter. Consider what has not happened yet. Shai has not been asked to rescue a series by himself while being criticized for doing too much. He's not yet been told implicitly or explicitly that his instincts, while brilliant, are beginning to compress the floor under playoff pressure. He's not yet faced accusation that Jordan faced for years, that his excellence simplifies the game in ways that make others smaller. That accusation only emerges when success stalls. Before the Thunder won the finals, before Dallas got torpedoed, they exposed something in the Thunder. Not a flaw, but a certain limit. Oklahoma City didn't lose that because they abandoned their identity. They lost because their identity had reached an edge. The series did not demand heroics. It demanded mass, patience, half-court endurance. The Thunder at that time did not possess those things consistently. This is where youth can act as camouflage. It can postpone the moment when restraint must be chosen rather than assumed. Delays the confrontation between instinct and structure. Eventually, though, the confrontation is going to arrive. When it does, the experience of restraint changes. What once felt like a collaboration can begin to feel constraining. What once felt like shared responsibility begins to feel like diluted authority. The system that once protected harmony can feel like a ceiling. This is the stage that Chicago entered after repeated failure. Jordan was not resisting the triangle because he disliked his teammates. He resisted it because he sensed that the structure was now governing his timing rather than responding to it. After the Dallas loss, adding Isaiah Hartenstein and Alex Caruso shows that the organization understood what was coming. They weren't luxury additions. They introduce friction. They slow games down. They provide a different dynamic. They demand accountability in the half court and especially their defense. Resistance is necessary. It's necessary to have counterpoints, counterbalances. But resistance also changes the emotional economy of a team. It makes patience costly. It forces choices. At some point, Shai will face a possession, maybe already this year in those Spurs matchups as a preview, that Jordan faced repeatedly. Late clock defense loaded, Wemby waiting on the back line, the system offering an option that feels correct but not inevitable. The decision will not be about trust. It will be about identity. Who resolves uncertainty when structure hesitates? Jordan answered the question by redefining dominance through delay. But that redefinition came at a cost of constant vigilance. It required him to govern himself repeatedly. The Thunder have not yet been asked to pay that cost. Their current harmony is genuine. It's also untested by prolonged frustration. No one has yet been forced to choose between instinct and patience when patience feels like erosion. That choice cannot be stimulated. It cannot be coached into existence. It only emerges when success pauses long enough to provoke doubt. Is that the moment right now with the Spurs? Probably not. It'll be in the playoffs this year. And that's why the Thunder story can't yet be told as assent or caution. It's currently in suspension. They're not a young version of the 1991 Bulls. They're closer to the 1989 Bulls. Brilliant, admired, structurally sound, and still operating with a range of responses that has yet to be challenged deeply enough to demand transformation. The question is not whether Oklahoma City will face this moment. They will. The question is how they'll feel internally when they do. Will the restraint still feel like growth, or will it feel like a deferral? Will hierarchy emerge quietly or through conflict? Will dominance be retimed or resisted? Those answers can't be predicted by ball movement or efficiency metrics. They're written later under pressure, when youth is no longer an explanation. Chicago answered those questions through enforced delay and psychological containment. That answer worked for a time. Oklahoma City has not yet been asked the question. It's not weakness. It's simply where they are. And that's a cool thing for any Thunder fan or fans of the NBA, because they could be on a trajectory where they win multiple titles in a row. I think it's fun to think about where they are, the Thunder are, and are they this budding dynasty? Or maybe it's the flip with the Spurs this year. I'm curious what you think, though. Until next time, keep your low.